And I'm back, this time with something a little different. It's a weekly roundup. We're covering web novels, but instead of covering other people's web novels who just want some fame and fortune and to be put in the spotlight, I'm doing a recommendations episode. These are works that were recommended by you, the viewer, in the forums and surprisingly on the YouTube discussion comment things, because it's apparently a thing. Not that it's been widely used. And this is interesting because, there's not a lot of them. Essentially, we have 3 people recommending. So, it's 3 stories from 3 people, although one of them recommended like 7 stories. Picked it out at random. And this is the point where I talk about my hopes and dreams, my expectations for what this episode was going to be. Because I figured, without a doubt, 100% that this was going to be the best episode ever. It's like 5s across the board, no doubt. Was why recommending me things you love, recommending me things that are entertaining, right? I don't think I got trolled. I think these were genuine recommendations, and not, because they'd be worse. None of these were like atrocious like some stories we've had, but they weren't, some of them weren't quite as amazing as I hoped. We got one good one today. I'll keep you guessing on that one. And so, if I was to summarize recommendation episodes, it would be this.
Now let's all agree to never
do recommendations
again.
Critics and liking things in general, and that the importance of people who recommend things and critics in general, which I guess I technically am in this instance, is that consistency. If a critic is consistent, then you can know whether you will like or dislike what they're talking about, whether you will have the same critical reaction to what they're talking about. If a critic is always wrong, like that one famous critic who hates all the good stuff and loves all the bad stuff, right there, then you know when he loves something that it's bad, and you know if he hates something that it's good. So now, with these people who have recommended me these things, I know which people, when they say it's good, I know which ones it's bad. And then the one guy who says it's good, I know that one's good. I understand their tastes now. And so that's how criticism works. On to it. Our first story is Congratulations, You're Dead. It's about 1,000 pages by SimonSaysWrite. It was released, 2 years ago? Yeah, started being released 2 years ago. It was all released 2 years ago. Which I guess, 100 chapters in a year, that's impressive. This is a game lit LRPG, whatever you call those, lit RPGs, lit PGs? I don't know, I don't care. Isekai. And is this a good one? Is this, out of our 3 stories, is this the hero? It starts off promising. It starts off really promising, actually. Not really promising, but it starts off promising. It's a really interesting way to start the story. Normally with isekai kind of stories, with portal fantasies, you want to start on Earth, establish your character, and then you do the death thing. You go through that. My last video was on all of this, the basics. And where that becomes interesting in the way that this author handled that is that he doesn't necessarily tell the story on Earth and how this character died and got moved over. It's entirely told from the sort of like in-between perspective, that, I don't know what you call it, limbo, purgatory? That's what you call it, purgatory. Entirely from the perspective of this deity, which a lot of people do. And when they do it, they're missing out all that good stuff that you want to build your story up. But the way this story does it is really interesting because it's, the main character is, his soul is there in the afterlife. And he doesn't talk ever. The entire thing is silent. But this deity talking about him over and over. You have a talkative deity. This story is supposed to be very humorous. Through their dialogue, over and over, each time this character dies on Earth, through their dialogue, we're basically getting a sense of what their life was like on Earth. We're not being told directly the story, like, here's Johnny going down the street, he gets hit by a truck. None of that. But just through this deity's perspective, we're getting that first part that you need, that build up on Earth, completely indirectly and really cleverly. It's a really clever subversion of sort of form and function there, where we're getting what we want in sort of a way that would normally not work. And the other portion that kind of worked and didn't work is the humor. In that anytime, you get a laugh out of me, I'm like, that was clever. That's good for comedy for me. And so you actually had that. There was a joke where I was like, that landed actually. I was a little worried at first, but then as we get going, it's like, that's actually a pretty humorous and clever bit. I like that. But then he kind of ruined it. A lot of the humor, it doesn't land, which is expected. That's where I start my day on these. A lot of the humor doesn't land. And then the one good joke they tell, and this is really the negative side here, the one good joke they tell, he keeps telling it. He keeps repeating that joke over and over and over. It's 7 times. It was funny the second time. The second time was the right amount of repetition to make the joke, and everything past that was like, you're making me feel bad about finding the joke funny. Oh, anyway. Oh, that's weird. I just realized that the author rewrote it, I guess. He rewrote the entire thing all in 1 year, using the exact same title and the exact same cover art. So I read one version. I don't know what version I read. It's a horrible way to do that. But in any case, so it's a game lit, which also sort of confuses. Oh, that's the other thing. That's the other thing, is that it also has really good world building in this section. Or just through this deity character talking, you have like an entire thing about a pantheon of deities and some sort of like grudge you have against the main character. That was really good. And I almost feel that gets ruined immediately once we get to the first chapter, because it's a lit RPG. It's a game PG. That's not right. It's portal fantasy in a game world, which kind of right away doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And that you go to another universe, and that universe functions like a video game. That doesn't. I don't know. That seems strange. Normally, I think of like when you're in a video game world, you're actually in a literal video game, not a universe that functions like a video game, because like life is so complex that you can't just boil it down to video game rules. And this character is a plant wizard person, and he's got some plant skills, but then he learns a whole bunch of other skills. And that's the portion that does right. You see a lot of people doing this like it's just complete wish fulfillment. They're just like, my character is the best at everything. He leveled up. He did this. He doesn't even have to learn this. Where you have scenes. You have actual scenes of your character sitting down for hours at a time and trying to learn a new skill that he sucks at and having no idea, which a lot of people don't do, and it's so basic, but the story does it right, where you're like, yes, this is good. Even if it's only like a few hours to learn this amazing, not even amazing, but just spending this time to learn this new skill and having to work for it. It adds so much that just breezing it over it doesn't add. So all of that is really good. On the base sort of like level up system and gamey stuff that people love, it functions really well. And that's probably why this story was recommended to me, because on that level, it's really good. And that's where my praises end. Yeah. Characters. Not good. Not good. Going back to my praises on the prologue there, where they establish sort of the character's backstory. All that is good, but you never get a sense of who the character is. Once again, they're silent the entire time. And almost that's why the prologue works better than the rest of the story. The main character is serviceable enough. He's not like atrocious. I don't hate him right out the gate. He does heroic things, which like he wants to do, like save somebody and stop the bad guys, which that seems like a really low bar, like obviously, but even in these videos, we've had problems with that before. All sort of, there's no sort of nuance with him. He's not an in-depth character. He's sort of shallow, and then you get to the side characters. Oh boy. So the first chapter, he saves a girl. bandits, from some sexual not goodness, which it's presented tastefully enough. I actually didn't have any problem with that. Someday we're gonna have the R talk, the R word talk, but we're not there yet, luckily. So thank you, Simon, for not bringing that upon us. He goes on this journey with this girl who is emotionally distraught. When this main character comes along in the first chapter to save her, her fiance, her boyfriend, the person that she loves, the man that she loves, has been killed by the bandits, and now she is horribly wrecked. So chapter 4, that's where it really takes off. Chapter 4 is where we have our sex scene. Oh yeah. So this girl, this emotionally distraught girl, who's just a wreck. Like, it's actually presented, that aspect of her personality is presented well, in that, yeah, I believe she just lost the love of her life. She hooks up with the main character in a scene that we're gonna have to talk about. Oh boy, are we gonna have to talk about that scene. But she hooks up with the main character, and up till now, I'm fine with all that. Someone has a horrible loss in their life, like they're really sad, depressed, there's like a fallback hookup, whatever. That's all fine. That's like a normal thing that people do. And then the start of chapter 5. Immediately after having sex with our main character, it's a complete 180. All of a sudden, she is just the happiest person in the world, and she's like in love now, and it's like, woo, doo, 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 doo. It's a great morning. The birds are singing. Woo, it's a fairy tale. Oh boy. No, that's not how it works. When you have a character who's like so emotionally broken up that they're just sleeping with random people, the fact that that's suddenly treated as romantic and that this person is just like okay now is really like, it's kind of disgusting, actually. Like the way this woman is presented, you're like, that's not how people are. That's oof. And it gets worse than that too, because we have an entire conversation about how she was a virgin, that she never actually had sex with her original love of her life, which really makes the hookup even weirder, because it's like you're with this man that you love for like, I don't know, however long it was. I don't know if we didn't get that much backstory. And then as soon as he dies, even though you were saving yourself for marriage or whatever it was, I don't even know. And then you're just like immediately have sex with someone else. That's, I don't know, that gets a little like iffy to me. That's like, okay. And that sort of typifies, yeah. Where it's like, it definitely makes me believe that hookup a lot less, and it really throws it out the window when she's like, all of a sudden she's happy and she's in love immediately. It's like, oh, is this character bipolar? I don't get it. Like there's elements here that are good, but the way they're presented, it's just like, no. And speaking of me saying no emphatically, let's just, before we wrap this up, because that's the characters in the story, where it's just like little parts that are like not completely wrong, but then you'll do something and it's just like, oh, that's not how people act. This is atrocious. Stop, please. Let's talk about the sex scene. Writing a sex scene is not inherently hard. A lot of people are really awkward at it. Just probably for the reason that it's like it's easy gratification. They don't treat it for what it is. It's just like, hey, here's a part of my story to get people to read it. But a sex scene is the same as it's any other scene. You have setup, you have build up, you set something up, you build it up. It's like, treat it like a 3-act structure, and then boom, there you go. You have a sex scene. It's just a scene. You have a rise and fall of action. Writers have a very awkward way of going about them, oftentimes, where they'll use verbiage, they'll use things, and you know, you have to imagine on a site like this, a lot of people like just They're like 13-year-olds who don't even know what sex is, really trying to write about it. Chapter 4 was hard to read. Like, yikes. Cringy. Your skin crawls a little bit. So just on top of all my other advice, some really quick advice to take away from this story's shortcomings in writing sex scenes. Just to do two things. There's some words, just don't use these words. Never call male genitalia your member. I stuck my member inside of her. Don't. Never do that. And if I was to offer a second piece of advice, be very careful on how you use the word glistening. And for the love of all that is holy, never put the two together. I should never read a story where I have to read about a glistening member. No. Like, you have like a very average construction of ideas that people like, and then some really cringy moments. I'm gonna give this one a 2.5. 2.5. Completely average. I'm gonna call this one completely average. Story 2. King in the Castle. Will this one be the hero to not embarrass me as I have to talk about it? Let's find out. So King in the Castle is a very interesting novel or web novel in these spheres to be put on like a Royal Road website, a web novel website, because the kind of story it is like a story you don't get on sites like this. It's really interesting in that it's like a rags to riches story about a guy in college who like he's a janitor at a tech company, and he sort of falls into success with inventing a super hard material, which is really weird. And even in like, if I like picked it up in like a bookstore, like that's unique. That's not like a thing people normally write about. And so right away you have this character who's an English major, and he's working as a janitor part-time at this company. And he like sort of lucks into a position where he's like, I can be this guy's assistant. And right away, people like put their life experiences into works when they do it, and that's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, this guy is an English major because he actually writes really well. The prose is really good for what I was expecting, and there's like this very character voice. It's all very much in this guy's head, and so he's like relating it to things he knows, and it's really good in terms of just like personality of the character and sort of where we're at in his head and the writing level. When you have a writer who writes like this and you have an English major character, I assume that's a stand-in. I assumed at first, I was like, okay, this is a guy who is or was an English major. But I changed my opinion on that as we went through, because you reached a certain point where there's almost like a dryness, like a sci-fi dryness to it, and like such a focus on the engineering components of the story, which once again makes it interesting, that I was like, no, this is not an English major. This is an engineering major. This is a STEM major who reads a lot and likes to write. So that's my presumption about the author, and that's what a lot of this book reads like. And that's important to point out, because that's sort of the summary here, is that it's a STEM major who likes to write. A lot of this is really dry. The storytelling is kind of flat. There's not that sense of excitement I talk about. Sometimes author, like, you have a sense of excitement. It's like, oh, this is exciting. Like, oh, our character is facing challenges and things happen. This is a very flat one. Like, if it was a bar graph, like, there wouldn't be any dips. We're like, oh, we have a problem, we have to solve it. Where it's just, there's an A plot, there's no B plot or any other thing going on. It's just about this character showing up and sort of lucking into these things. And that thing that's going, the A plot is interesting enough, but at no point do we feel like struggle or there's like a reason to really root for this character. We don't feel like he's overcoming anything. It's kind of a story of him just kind of being lucking into this thing and being like, oh, well, here we go. This is actually a good story. This is our hero I was talking about. This is the one that saves the day from just complete averageness and embarrassment. King in the Castle it's unique. I didn't have a super good time reading it, and I think that's the big thing. It's not super entertaining, but it is a really interesting take on a story. And just like the focus is on, like, as far as discovering a technology goes, like, that's like so many crazy things. I discovered a teleporter. I discovered a rare disease, whatever. He discovers a material that is like super hard. It's completely unbreakable, inventable. And so like the story starts out and he's like making like helmets and body armor for soldiers. And like it follows a very logical progression, and it's interesting on that level where it's like, this is, it's really different. And you almost need that B plot where he's like, I'm struggling for money, I might fail school. Like he talks about it like, oh no, I need time to study for school, but there's no drama in the book. I am deficient in some way. I have to learn something as a person in this way. I have a weakness that I have to overcome because that's directly interfering with the story in some way. And you don't get any of that here, which is like, it's just a flat line. He starts here and it's just a progression. It's a cool idea, and you're very much in this character's head, and it's well written. So I'm giving this one, just for that lack of excitement is where it takes off, I'm giving this one a 4.5 out of 5. It just misses the mark of being a really good web novel because it is formatted that way. It's not like a person trying to do a novel. It's pretty short chapters, and it's very readable. In the future, when Deacon Zire recommends me a story, I can say, you know what? That's probably giving me a pretty good story. And that applies to me. If you really liked the first story and you think I'm full of crap, then you know that, I'm not a good person to judge for your taste in horribly embarrassing lit RPG sex stories. And if you find King of the Castle too boring, then, well, there you go. You don't have the same appreciation for art that I do. You rube. All right, our last story is Kuro's story. We have another isekai here, and this one is hard to explain because it's like, what? A man dies? No reason to like him whatsoever. He's like he hasn't left the house in 15 years. And I think he dies because he just starves to death. He can't be bothered. I'm not sure. It's really unclear. It's not well written at all. But I think he dies just because he can't be bothered to go out and get food. I think he starves to death in his apartment. Maybe he weighs like 500 pounds. He can't leave. This is all speculation. I don't know. When he dies, he really likes Skyrim. So he gets reincarnated with Skyrim powers. Explain this. So when I say someone gets reincarnated with Skyrim powers, you're like, oh, he's in Skyrim. No, he's not in Skyrim. You're like, oh, he's reincarnated in another world with, I don't know, the lit RPG system of Skyrim. I don't know. I can't. The first 1 or 2 chapters when they're explaining things makes it incredibly clear that he has the level up system from Skyrim, that he can shoot fireballs and whatever. But he doesn't get transported to a Skyrim world. That much is clear. Which, first off, why? If you just want to have like a lit RPG system and a Skyrim thing, you just do that. Or say like, oh, this is like Skyrim. But no, it is literally the system from Skyrim in just a completely separate context, which is really jarring right out the gate. And it becomes even more jarring when it doesn't come up again. He doesn't use it. This I actually was going to give a lower score to our first story until I read this. I was like, you know what? Screw this one. The first guy looks like Mozart compared to this writer. Because like in the first story, you have a lit RPG system. They do something like, oh, you leveled up. You use your skills. This one's like, I have these things. I never use them. I don't level up. I don't throw fireballs. It's like, why did we establish all of this? Why are these things you're not using? I'm sure it comes back later past I read, and there's like a tiny bit of it, but it's like, you establish this as like the hook of the story. And then it's like, you average less than a sentence per chapter using it in any way whatsoever. It's like, why have it in the first place? Not even that. Like, step one is why build your world like this in the first place? Because it's like a weird disconnect. And then number 2, if you are going to have that weird disconnect and go out of your way to be really freaking weird with it, why not even use it at all? Why just ignore it? So anyway, we have a guy who's just the worst character ever. And he likes playing women in video games. So he's now a woman. We've seen this before, where people sort of have like, it's not like a transgenderism thing. It's not like a commentary on sex or gender. It's just someone saying, I do this in video games. Let's include it in a story. And they do include these things without engaging with them whatsoever. They don't treat it like it is. It is a man in a woman's body, or a man who is being a woman now. And yet it's like an aesthetic thing, like a video game. There's this video game logic, like where it's like brought into people's brains. Where it's like, no, you're writing a story, and a story, the things you include are part of the story. You have to engage with them. If you as a human being woke up in a woman's body the next day, there's a lot of baggage that goes with that. There's a lot you have to engage with. And here, the author like has the person molest themselves in the first chapter, and past that, there's like nothing. It's weird. And as weird as all that is, and it's and just the sort of lack of any sort of forethought or actual writing by the author to sort of engage with the things he's created. That's the thing. Like, put Skyrim in there. It's like, forget about it. We don't need to worry about it. I don't need to talk about any of that at all, or how that works. Put in, I'm a woman now. Forget it. It's just a thing. It's a thing in my story. It's like ADHD, the story, where it's just like, I forgot about it. I wrote it 5 minutes ago, but I forgot about it. And this train continues. We're only getting started here. And so they get sent to another world, except this world is like a scientifically advanced world. And they know about reincarnation and people being sent to other worlds. And so like there's this entire bit about how like the police officer who first arrests the main character for not voyeurism, that's other people. The exhibitionism? Yes, exhibitionism. That's like the opposite of voyeurism, right? I guess opposite. Yeah, that is the opposite. I'm going to say exhibitionism is the opposite of voyeurism. So the big twist in the second chapter is that the police officer knows that people come to this world from other worlds. But then like his entire interrogation, because that's the first chapter, or maybe that's the second chapter. The second chapter is the interrogation. The third chapter is the interrogation from the point of view of the police officer. So the second chapter, you have this character who is now a woman sitting in a chair, just acting like an idiot. For no real reason, just like completely dismissive of everything. And the police officer is asking questions like the police officer is confused and doesn't know what's going on. Like, he's like, well, that's really weird that there's this woman here who has magical items on her. That's weird. And then you get to the third chapter and you find out that everything in the second chapter was completely fraudulent, and that this is normal. People come from the sky often and I guess have magical powers. And once again, this is the thing that the author doesn't engage with. It's like, what does that look like? Do other people come in with magical powers? And you're like, how does the government deal with this? How do the police deal with this when like there's every human being on this planet has a different magical system? Does every human being on this planet come from a different planet, or is it just, do they sometimes have outside visitors? Ugh. Every single component of this story is just like here for a chapter because the author thought about it, and it's just like moving on. There's no answer to these questions. This story has over 1 million views. Excuse me. Why? So anyway, the story as a whole is like a slice of life. And that's sort of the consistent elements it moves into, starting in like chapter 4, is where they get adopted by a family. Because apparently this 30-year-old man is now an underage girl, which, okay, that's the least of our problems here. And then they get adopted because they're 15. But yeah, that's my point though. If they have people get reincarnated into this world, if it's a portal fantasy and they know that, then why are they treating this 30-year-old man like a 15-year-old girl? Do they not know it's a 15-year-old girl? A 30-year-old man? Because we've established that they know these things. That people come in and like, oh, they have these magical powers. And then but you're like, it's just convenient. It's they only know as much as is convenient to the plot. Where it's like, oh, we're treating you like a 15-year-old girl, I guess. This is oh boy. Like, yeah. The more this is one of those stories. The more I talk about it, the more I hate it. I started this a bit more positive because like you move into this thing where they get adopted and it's the story is slice of life. You wouldn't know that because we've already been through 17 genres so far. But the story is slice of life where they get adopted and like they go to school and there's like a magical adventurer school, which once again that's another genre. We're on genre 2700 by the time we get to chapter 6 here. And it's like. Yes, yeah, and like they have these lit RPG powers. When they finally get used again in chapter 6 or 7 or whatever, it's like apparently like other people that's the only interesting idea here is that other people in the world who've come to the world have cooler systems of power where they're stronger, but it doesn't matter. Like it's not engaged with in any substantial way. I can't look at this and say like, oh yes, because that is a cool idea. The idea that you're in a world where everyone's been, which I don't even know that's true. Let's assume it's true. Let's assume you're in a world where everyone there has been portal fantasied. I mean, everyone has a different magic system. And you have a really cool one. And you get there and you realize like your awesome magic system that you thought was so cool is actually kind of sucks compared to all these other people. Like, that's a good idea for a story. Someone who's on their meds, go write that story. This becomes so hard to describe because not only are there like everything going on and none of it's thought out, and it's all inconsistency. Like, there's so much here. Like I have notes, I have pages of notes over a page where it's just like that contradicts that contradicts that. It's a slice of life story, which is what you're trying to make, and it's like you have to perform quantum physics to understand how to buy shoes. That doesn't really make sense. I shouldn't be confused by the horrible complexity of a slice of life story. Like it's the opposite of what these stories are. It's a person who's like, I'm living life, and yeah, the characters are awful. Like some of the new characters you get later on are better, but even that, like are those characters also 30-year-old? That would be a great plot twist. Here's another book you can write. A character gets portal fantasied into a world of hot 15-year-old anime women, girls. And then halfway through the story, you find out that everyone there is a 50-year-old man. That's a story. Someone write that. Anyway, I'm done with this. Like, I can't. We started out this discussion with Skyrim. Remember Skyrim? The author doesn't. 1 out of 5. I had better luck picking stories at random.
Now let's all agree to never
do recommendations
again. Now let's all agree to never
do recommendations
again. Now let's all agree to never
do recommendations
again.